Cyberpunk 2077 is set to release on April 16th, 2020, and is probably going to be one of the biggest releases of the next few years. And just earlier, we got a couple of big pieces of news from CD Projekt Red's Twitter, which is some good news and possibly some bad news depending on whether or not you hate multiplayer and single-player focused games. Because they tweeted, until now the only thing we said about multiplayer was that it was in research and development. As we're getting closer to launching single-player Cyberpunk 2077 in April 2020, we'd like to confirm that multiplayer is in the works. And then they left a link for potential people to apply to help develop it. So there are already a lot of different opinions and even outrage over this already. Some are angry that multiplayer is even a thing in Cyberpunk 2077, especially since it seems like every big single-player developer is starting to go multiplayer. Some people don't really care, and I even saw other people saying that they should have made this a multiplayer game from the beginning and focused only on multiplayer. Some speculations are that this will be co-op, and others are that it will be a full-on multiplayer PvP like Call of Duty. If this game is going to have multiplayer, I personally would want to have a co-op mode rather than PvP, but if I had to guess, I'd say that it's probably not going to be co-op and will most likely be a PvP mode. For one, usually developers will specifically call it co-op instead of multiplayer if it is co-op, and it seems like this is an entirely different project. If it was co-op just within the same single-player game, it probably wouldn't be a whole separate project, and it would probably be hard to implement that in this late into the development. I'm obviously not a developer though, so that's just a guess. I'd really like to know your opinions on this down in the comments because there seems to be a lot of different thoughts on it so far. I understand that people are annoyed at bringing multiplayer to Cyberpunk, but at the same time it's annoying to constantly see outrage culture crap with every single game that releases. I don't think we have enough info yet to start rioting and holding picket signs outside of their studio. Personally, I love single player games. I do play a fair share of multiplayer games every so often, but my favorite thing is single player, and other than Outer Worlds, this has probably been the #1 game that I've been hyped for, probably for the past year or so at least. So I get people getting scared, especially since multiplayer usually tends to come with a bunch of microtransactions these days, but there are other games like The Last of Us, Uncharted, and Far Cry 3, all of which were great single player focused games, but still had multiplayer modes that were pretty fun and didn't take anything away from single player focus, and instead was just a little thing on the side. If they can do it like that, I don't see the big deal. My only concern is how late to the game they are with the multiplayer, which they kind of get into in their next tweet. They went on to say, the plan for now is to deliver Cyberpunk 2077 in April, then follow up with free DLCs and single player content. Then once we're done, invite you for some multiplayer action. So like I was getting at, they're not focusing on multiplayer until after completing everything with the single player, which will include free DLC, which is awesome. And even kind of surprising, even with it being CD Projekt Red. The only thing that worries me is the reason for suddenly shifting over to multiplayer. It's clear that it wasn't part of the plan at first, or at least not a big part of it, so why all of a sudden decide to add it now? Like, why suddenly get into multiplayer? It's really weird, and that's my only concern with it. I'm sure they'll make some type of profit off of it, which will probably be microtransactions, especially since they won't be making a profit off of the DLCs, and they've got to make some sort of profit off of multiplayer since it looks like they'll be putting a bit of resources into it. I would be really surprised if they also didn't make any money off of multiplayer. And honestly, I don't really care about any of that because it looks like they'll be keeping focus on single player up until they've released everything for it, which is really good news, especially since once again the DLC will be completely free, and if you ever played The Witcher 3, which you probably have, the DLC there was awesome and some of the best DLC to ever be released in terms of quality in my opinion. The DLC was like completely whole new games, so if it's anything like that, it's a pretty sweet deal. Most companies nowadays want you to pre-order for some small DLC, get the season pass, and pre-order a higher edition to get the game early. So if they're giving us Cyberpunk 2077 with all of the DLC at one standard price, I don't really mind if they have multiplayer, even if they do make money off of it there with microtransactions. And just a theory that I have on their multiplayer, if they focus on it, could be pretty huge. They might be seeing a GTA 5 sort of angle. If you imagine GTA 5 type things like a free open world city, but Cyberpunk 2077 online, I could see that being a pretty big online game. I don't know how much they're planning on focusing on this, if it's going to be that huge in a free open world, or just a little arcadey deathmatch type thing. But I think they might be going for the open world thing. And although I don't really care about that, if they put enough focus into it, unlike Red Dead Online, I could see it being a pretty big online game. But I'd love to hear what you guys think about this DLC and multiplayer news. Again, there have been tons of different opinions on this topic since they tweeted it out this morning. But that's pretty much it. See ya.